Thank you. The clerk has let me know that we have a quorum. If there's any members calling in by phone, can you please identify yourselves? Are there any members calling by phone?
Ann Marshall, City of Avalon.
Ms. Marshall, are you calling in by phone?
Yes, I am.
Can you please identify your phone number?
310-339-2935.
I'm going to call the meeting order, and I am going to ask Cerritos Councilmember Linda Johnson to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the
United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good morning, everyone. Today is Thursday, June 1, 2023. Welcome to those members who are joining us today in person at SCAG's Los Angeles offices. We are holding this meeting in compliance with Brown Act rules relating to telephonic video conference meetings. SCAG offices are open for members of the public to attend and participate in person. Instructions for providing public comment have been provided in advance and are also included in the agenda packet. Just a reminder to reduce background noise. Please ensure that your microphone is muted when not in use. For those of you who are attending by Zoom or by telephone. I will now open the public comment period of the meeting. This is the time for members of the public to offer comment for matters that are within SCAG's jurisdiction but are not listed on the agenda. Staff, have we received any written public comments after the deadline of 5 p.m. on Wednesday, May 31, 2023?
Mr. Chair, I can confirm we have received no written comments before or after the deadline of May 31st.
Thank you, Ms. Macias. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak?
Mr. Chair, I see no raised hands online.
Do we have any members of the public in person who wish to speak? No. I will now close the public comment period for matters not listed on the agenda. I ask the committee members of the CEHD committee, does anyone want to, do any of the members want to review and prioritize any agenda items? Okay. Mr. Mirish?
I just want to note that even though it's not in there, but I'd like to make sure that we add at the end under, I think it's announcements, future, our ability to discuss future agenda items. So it's not specifically listed, but I think that would be an appropriate place to ask for suggestions for future agenda items, if that's okay with the chair.
Yes, Mr. Mirish, we will do that.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I would like to remind everyone to unmute your phone before speaking and state your name during deliberations and whether making a motion or offering a second. And for those who have joined by phone, press *6 to mute and unmute your phone. Consent calendar. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on this item?
Mr. Chair, I see no members of the public with raised hands on our virtual platform, and I am not seeing any in person.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Macias. Do any members of the committee want to pull anything from the consent calendar?
I'll move the consent calendar, Wendy Bucknam.
I'll second.
We have a motion to approve the consent calendar from Ms. Bucknam and a second from Ms. Hupp. Madam Clerk, can you please do the roll call vote?
Yes, this is for the consent calendar, items 1 through 6. Valerie Mesquez. For the consent calendar, yes? Yes. Thank you. Adele Andrade Stadler,
Yes.
Gary Boyer,
Yes.
Wendy Bucknam,
Yes.
Don Caskey,
Yes.
Deborah Doris Parada, Keith Ike,
Yes.
Bob Engler,
Yes.
Rosa Espinosa, Wayman Furman,
Aye.
thank you, Margaret Finley, Claudia Fermetta,
Aye.
Marshall Goodman,
Aye.
Mark Henderson,
Aye.
Cecilia Huff,
Yes.
Linda Johnson,
Yes.
Kathleen
Yes.
Kelly, thank you,
Yes.
Lauren Kleiman, Matt Levere,
Yes.
Jed Liano,
Yes.
Annie Marshall,
Yes.
Andrew Maciel,
Yes.
Casey McKeon, John Mirish,
Yes.
Joseph Marabito, George Nava, Maricela Nava,
Yes.
Ariel Pay,
Yes.
Misty Perez, Nithya Raman, Rocky Rhodes,
Yes.
Sylvia Robles,
Yes.
Sonny Santinez,
Yes.
Andrew Sariga, David Shapiro,
Yes.
Becky Shevlin,
Yes.
Helen Tran, Mark Warrenick,
Aye.
Tony Wu, Frank Yokoyama,
Yes.
and Frank Saranian.
Yes.
Thank you. Chair, the consent calendar passes with 31 yes votes, 0 no, and 0 abstentions.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We now move to information items. Number 7. Connect SoCal 2024 Policy Development Framework Update. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on this item?
Mr. Chair, I see no raised hands from members of the public, and I'm seeing none in person.
Thank you, Ms. Macias. This is an information item. In March 2023, staff reported to the Joint Policy Committee changes to the Connect SoCal Policy Development Framework and introduced the regional planning policies. The regional planning policies provide guidance for integrating land use and transportation planning to realize the vision of Connect SoCal. This item includes an update to the proposed draft regional planning policies to be included in the policy development framework and draft Connect SoCal 2024 plan. The draft Connect SoCal 2024 plan will be released for public review in the fall of this year. I now turn it over to Elizabeth Carvajal, Deputy Director of Planning. Thank you.
Sure, I have the microphone on. Good morning, everyone. Again, Elizabeth Carvajal, Deputy Director of Planning and Land Use. As the chair noted, I'll be presenting on the draft regional planning policies for Connect SoCal. So we're going to start off first with some background on the policy development framework. As a reminder, this was approved or adopted, I should say, by the Regional Council in June of 2022. The policy development framework established a policy direction, priorities, it identified emerging issues, and also called for the establishment of special subcommittees for Connect SoCal. The policy development framework was amended or recommended for changes by staff at the March 2023 Joint Policy Committee by introducing those regional planning policies. So the regional planning policies really set guidance for how we integrate transportation and land use planning and achieve the goals of Connect SoCal. These regional planning policies have been refined over time through the various plan cycles, as well as through feedback from the regional council, the policy committees, and of course, the special subcommittees. The regional policies will be a resource for transportation agencies and local jurisdictions as they're seeking to demonstrate alignment with the regional transportation plan and the sustainable community strategy as they secure state and federal funding programs. As a reminder, here we have the draft vision and the goals for the plan. The draft vision is a healthy, accessible, and connected region for a more resilient and equitable future. Under that, we have 4 goals that are focused around mobility, communities, environment, and economy. Under each of the goals, we have several policy categories. They're listed under each of those 4 goals. Those that have an asterisk next to them are those that are new to Connect SoCal 2024. I want to highlight that in the next few slides, we'll be sharing some of those example draft regional planning policies, but the more comprehensive list is included in the staff report as an attachment. The focus of this particular policy committee will be more around the community. So I'll focus more on that one and move a little more swiftly through the other policy goals. So the first 3 that I'll focus on here are mobility goals and the related regional transportation policies. Here we have policies around transportation demand management, which is really looking at alternatives that can reduce a single vehicle occupancy. We also have policies around system management and technology. We also, in the mobility goal, have regional planning policies around system preservation and complete streets, which is really focused on having streets that meet the needs of all users of all ages and abilities through various modes. And then we have regional planning policies around multimodal integration, safety, and funding. Moving on to the community's goal, the first regional planning policy is around priority development areas. And so the policy here is to foster growth within the forecasted regional development pattern of Connect SoCal by prioritizing policies that encourage housing and employment in priority development areas. So to put it simply, this is really about encouraging policies that prioritize housing and employment in our priority development areas. The next draft regional planning policy is called for housing the region. So here we call for encouraging housing development in areas with access to important resources and amenities to further fair housing and access and equity across the region. So this is lifting up the importance of ensuring housing is near important economic, educational, health resources to further fair housing and equity. The next draft regional planning policy for communities is around 15-minute communities, And as a reminder, we had a panel present on this concept back in April, I believe it was. So this draft regional planning policy calls for promoting 15-minute communities as places that have a mix of complementary land uses and accessible mobility options that align with and support the diversity of places or communities across the region, where residents can access their most basic day-to-day needs within a 15-minute walk, bike ride, or roll from home, or places that result in fewer or shorter trips because of the proximity of these complementary land uses. So this is a mouthful, and essentially we're elevating 2 elements here. So one of them is that folks are able to get to places that have complementary land uses within a 15-minute walk, a bike ride, or roll from home. And the other is where you have places that have complementary land uses that when you get there, whether it takes you more than 15 minutes or you drive, because these things are close together, you're taking fewer trips and shorter trips. And the final community's regional policy is around equitable engagement and decision-making. Here we call for advancing community-centered interventions, resources, and programming that serve the most disadvantaged communities and people in the region, like our priority equity communities with strategies that can be implemented in the short to long term. So in this particular policy, we're recognizing that there are disadvantaged communities in the region, and as we seek to serve them, that they're part of the decision-making and the identification of solutions. Under the environmental goal, we have a few regional planning policies here around sustainable development, improving air quality and clean transportation that is accelerating zero emissions. We have draft regional planning policies around natural and agricultural land and climate resilience with a prioritization for the most vulnerable. And in economy, we have policies around the goods movement, broadband, universal basic mobility, which is critical as we think about that as an element of how people get to jobs and educational resources and services. And we have draft regional planning policies around tourism and workforce development. In this particular draft policy, we're looking at fostering a positive business climate by promoting regional collaboration in workforce and economic development between cities, counties, and educational institutions and employers. So here we're lifting up the importance of a positive business climate and also identifying all those key stakeholders that are essential for a positive economic and workforce development space. We released these draft regional planning policies for public review in April, and what you see before you in your packet is reflective of the feedback we received. Here are just some examples of the folks we engaged. In terms of next steps, today we're sharing those draft regional planning policies with you, and we're looking for your feedback and comments. In July, we'll be going to the EAC and the Regional Council seeking approval of the updated policy development framework, which would include the updated regional planning policies. And in the summer, excuse me, we would start developing the implementation strategies that would be included in the draft plan that we'll release in the fall. So that concludes my presentation. Happy to take questions or comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Carvajal. I will now entertain comments from members of the CEHD committee. Do any members of the committee have any comments? And I call on John Mirisch.
Thanks so much. Here are just a few bullet points. Where we talk about fostering growth, I think it's better if we discuss accommodating growth. As Kevin Kane has mentioned before, the growth outlook for our region is changing, and perhaps the focus should be, instead of accommodating growth, working on improving the life of the people who are here. So if there's not going to be growth, as said, then the focus should be improving the lives of those who are here through a combination of all these things. I also think when we talk about where we want to place housing and that sort of thing, we always need to include people's housing preferences. So it's not like we want to force them into something that they don't want to be in. What do people want? We really have to have that as part of the overall picture, I think. When it comes to transportation, I also think that we need to do some studies to see that the theories that we're positing actually match reality. And there are discussions about a number of things about people using public transportation. But if we're talking about productivity, then the question is, and Kevin Kane mentioned that there's going to be statistics, so we can do this. What is the actual time that people spend commuting using cars versus using other forms of transportation? And, I think we'll find that unfortunately in our region, it's very different from, for example, London or Stockholm, where it's probably in many cases quicker to take public transportation. But if people are spending 2 to 4 times the amount of time commuting, what does that do to quality of life? What does that do to productivity, for example? And as I've mentioned before, I do think we specifically need to focus on the potential of remote work. It's not for everybody, but is it possible for us to expand it? Not only to expand what we do remotely in terms of work, but in terms of other activities, which will mean people don't need as many trips, don't need to, we recognize that certain things are not substitutable. You want to go to a Dodger game, I guess you could watch on TV, but you go to the game. But there are probably a lot of other activities that are substitutable, including, I may add, these kinds of meetings that we're at now, where we know we're limited to, we have people driving in 2 hours. Wouldn't it make sense to be able to, and it's great for us to see each other, but to do sometimes these things remotely, talk about vehicle miles traveled and all of that. Finally, I know that sorry, there's also another point I wanted to mention in transportation. We talk about complete streets. I would love for us to look at the theories. There's a Dutch traffic engineer called Hans Monderman who talks about shared spaces. I'd love for us to maybe get a presentation on that and see if in some of our communities, it's counterintuitive, but I have a great example in our community where it makes a lot of sense. And then finally, as said, in terms of goals, I know we mentioned under one of the subheads sustainability, and I think that's important, but I also think it's important, and it's a related concept and very related concept, the concept of stability. Stability for communities, stability for families, stability for renters, stability for homeowners, stability for our residents. What can we do to encourage stability, which I think actually helps make our community stronger? So great report. Those are my comments, and these are issues that I think that we should be talking about. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Any other members of the committee? Mr. Boyer, Mr. Gary Boyer.
Thanks, Frank. You know, we have a safety factor in the report, but what we're not hearing about is safety of passengers on public transportation. And I don't know if that has been discussed and if it might be part of a conversation that we're just not hearing about, or if it's something that's been overlooked, because it's an issue that we're all having on a regular basis. I brought the train in today, and there was a large presence of police officers and sheriff deputies, but there hasn't been for quite some time. So I'm just wondering if that is part of what we're looking at to try to make sure people feel safe when they do take public transportation.
The example mobility regional planning policies that were included in the presentation are examples of a broader range of policies that are attached to the staff report. I don't recall offhand if that's referenced, but I am taking note of that comment, and we'll certainly bring it back as we take this feedback and look at the policies and make those updates. So appreciate the comment.
Hello, this is Annie Marshall.
Ms. Marshall, did you have a comment?
Yes, and I am sorry, I don't know if this Mr. Marish is a councilman or a mayor, but I hear him calmly saying the same things every month. And I don't know if any of his comments are going forward for actual research and discussion. Like you talk, you know, he talks about the potential of remote use, theories, matching reality, and those kinds of things. And I don't know, councilman or mayor, how you're feeling about the comments that you seem to make every month.
I mean, I guess there's an expression, persistence overcomes resistance. I just think I think they continue to be relevant, and I would love to, you know, as said, I can't say that I necessarily do see us discussing them, but hopefully at some point we will. I mean, if you think that some of them are off the wall or whatever, I just think that these are things that we should be discussing, and that's why we're all on this committee. And I guess there certainly is some sort of repetition, but there's a reason for it. I think these continue to be valid points and questions, and relevant to any number of issues, whether it's transportation or planning or zoning or all of them. I do think that these are issues that are not discussed in general, and that they should be. And I don't think it's just at SCAG. I think in general, the dialogue when it comes to these issues, that's why I keep speaking up. Thank you.
Well, and I am supporting what you say every month. So I just, you know, you don't seem to get frustrated in your voice, but I think you make some very valid points, and I think that there's other members of SCAG that are agreeing with some of the things you're saying, that perhaps SCAG staff can look into them.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, I'd like to point out that SCAG and the SCAG staff do look for feedback from this committee, the CEHD committee, at these meetings. And specifically, the purpose of this agenda item is that SCAG staff is seeking feedback today from all of you committee members on these draft regional planning policies. And it is stated, they have stated in their report, and Ms. Carvajal has stated in her report today, that the feedback received from you committee members at today's meeting will be used to update and revise these draft regional planning policies that she has gone over in her agenda report to us today. So all of your comments are well received by SCAG staff today and in all of our meetings. So I encourage all of you, just like Mr. Marish does regularly, as commented by Ms. Marshall, please share your comments and questions with SCAG staff at today's meeting and every meeting as members of the CEHD committee. Now I now call on Honorable Frank Zarunian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the report very much. These are obviously very important policy topics that certainly John is commenting on and we're commenting on. We keep hearing about the job and housing balance policies, which is absolutely spot on. I think where we fail is the implementation of that policy typically. The reason why we fail, I think, is because we do not involve the other stakeholders or the other sectors, which are part and parcel of this policy. In all of our meetings, I know that we have major private sector participants or stakeholders that come to our meetings, whether it's Amazon or the other entities. Do we engage them on a regular basis to find out where exactly their next strategy is about the creation of possible jobs? Because when they create jobs, they create them in the thousands. That, of course, will spot the location of some of the housing that needs to go. This one-size-fits-all approach, we all know, has not worked. It'll never work, even though it's been pushed by the state. But I think the reasonable and the more effective policies are about the balancing of that jobs to housing. And I would encourage us to really talk to these major employers to find out where their next strategy is, where they're looking at, because it's usually they know. Usually they have a strategy to open up a place, whether it's Inland Empire or Ventura County or whatever it may be. It's just that we're not catching them at the right time to figure all this out. So I would really urge us at SCAG to really reach out to see if these major organizations are intending to create these job opportunities in our SCAG region. Thank you.
For that comment.
Mr. Boyer, do you have another comment?
Well, just an idea, speaking on to, John's comments that have been discussed multiple times. As we make comments, as committee members, I'm just wondering if there's a way for us to measure what everybody else feels about those comments, because, we all make comments, we all have ideas. Some of the ideas are off the wall and I may be the only person that believes in it, but others, there may be things that unanimously we all think is very important. And I just wonder if we have a way to measure that so that we as committee members could get some of these things moving forward as we have the discussions. So I would just say I think it's an idea worth discussing.
And SCAG staff is noting those comments of yours, Mr. Boyer.
This is Keith Ike.
Okay, Mr. Keith Ike.
I will just echo what Mr. Boyer said and also suggest that the gentleman from Beverly Hills, I 100% agree with everything he said. I think there's a lot of great ideas in here, and it actually comes down to some degree prioritizing them. So today, that's a big list. How do you figure out which ones maybe are more important than others to focus on in the short term? So.
Thank you. And I will be calling on the members of the committee attending remotely who have raised hands, and I will be calling first on Kathleen Kelly and then second, Wendy Bucknam. So first, Kathleen Kelly.
Thank you. I want to feature and particularly commend items 55 and 56 in the draft document. These are highly responsive to past discussions in policy committees and also subcommittees. 55 says consider the full environmental life cycle of clean transportation. In other words, don't just look at the point of consumption, look at the environmental impacts of production on the front end, and also look at the environmental impacts of disposal. What kind of waste does each methodology produce? That is so critical, especially where overemphasis on electricity and batteries is concerned. Item 56 is maintain a technology neutral approach. Again, we as SCAG want to be nimble in being open to the development of technologies which may not have as much production or disposal adverse impact. So I think those are beautifully stated and just wanted to feature my appreciation. On the topic of what we should be discussing, two of John's major themes are that we ought to be taking account of people's preferences in housing, and we ought to be paying attention to remote work. I'm going to suspect we have near 100% agreement on that, because if you don't take account of people's preferences, they're going to keep doing what they're doing. And our model won't incorporate that variable. In the city of Palm Desert, the way we handle this is if someone makes a request for inclusion of an item for a future agenda, that's included so long as a majority support it. That assures that one person's topics won't fill the time available, and that topics which do have the interest of a majority are considered. So that's one possible process.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. And I now call on Wendy Bucknam.
Thank you. I just want to encourage everybody. The City of Mission Viejo did send in comments directly to staff. So please work with your city staff and make sure that they're providing comment on this. I know sometimes we don't all speak up. I'm not one of those that doesn't speak up. I think you know that, but I want to thank those that have spoken, and I am in agreement absolutely with the preferences and the types of housing that people are wanting, as well as we've got to take into consideration remote work. This actually came up during the last RHNA cycle, and we just didn't have enough data to make decisions on that. So, so I'm in agreement. And again, work with your staff and send in comments. This is an important item, and the staff needs to hear. So thank you so much.
Good comment, Ms. Bucknam. Yes, every meeting, my staff, my City of Cerritos staff automatically gets the SCAG agenda reports for their review and information. Any other comments from the committee? Mr. Maciel?
Well, I just wanted to share a little bit with you, particularly to the individual that spoke about employment and locations of, businesses and so forth. I'm on the board of directors for the Pechanga Development Corporation, and one of our many responsibilities is to oversee the casino operation. So we have before the pandemic, we had 5,300 employees, full-time employees. We now have 3,750 employees. It's not that we're ever going to get to that level. It's just certain things have caused us not to open. But when we had the 5,200, we actually implemented programs that encouraged people to carpool. We offered the incentives on their paychecks. They were known as lead transporters. How we did it, it was relatively easy. Folks live in proximity of others, and if there's 6, 7 people within a mile radius of one's location, that qualified as a carpool. Now, we didn't say everybody and the brother jump in the van. No, you had to have insurance, you had to be approved insurance, you had things to do. But the fact that you did that incentivized folks to carpool. Did we make an impact? I think we did. The problem is, I don't know if you guys remember years ago, there used to be tax incentives that were offered for folks to carpool and van pool and so forth. That doesn't exist anymore. I mean, I think, and I know we're not the state legislature here, but we can certainly advocate things like that. Things like that need to happen in a big way. We're doing our part for us that works. It's incentivize. Not everybody participates, but obviously they're encouraged. And here's why. These employees are driving, in some cases, 2 hours to get here because our proximity of employment reaches all the way to Los Angeles County, Orange County, San Diego County, and of course, Riverside County. But if folks are having to drive an hour and a half to get to work and an hour and a half to get home, that's a 12, 13-hour day. And if we can help that in any way and lessen that time, I mean, I think that's not only the philosophy, but I think that's what things in policymakers need to think of. And to your point about where businesses locate, that's true. They do know. Big corporations and facilities, they know where they're going to locate. And one of the things that I think is missing is the employment factor. I mean, they'll hire folks when they get there. I get that. But in terms of proximity, there's really no intermittent planning to discover that. And I think maybe as a policymaker, I don't know how you do this, but I don't know how you do a lot of this stuff, but I think we got to do some of it and just start not addressing how we can't, but how we can. Anyway, that's just my addition.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Maciel. And thank you for that presentation, Ms. Carvajal. We'll now turn to information item number 8, Connect SoCal Regional Growth Vision and Local Data Exchange Evaluation. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on this item?
Mr. Chair, I'm seeing no hands raised on Zoom and no members of the public in person. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Macias. This is an information item. The Regional Growth Vision acts as a bridge between local plans and state targets, particularly greenhouse gas emissions. Connect SoCal projects how much the region will grow by 2050. Staff met with local jurisdictions to review and refine this projection during the local data exchange process. In order to provide more context before the release of the draft plan this fall, Dr. Kevin Kane will share an evaluation of the regional growth vision based on the housing and sustainability objectives of Connect SoCal. I turn it over to Dr. Kevin Kane, SCAG Principal Regional Planner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members of the committee. Happy to be here again to report on kind of the progress of the Connect SoCal Regional Growth Vision. This is a little bit of an extension and getting into the weeds a bit of what Elizabeth's more high-level policy-oriented discussion was previously. So as you may have noticed, we're actually kind of reaching the home stretch for a lot of Connect SoCal development. We do aim to release a draft of the complete plan by October of this year. You saw the regional policies, but on the more technical side, we've aggregated all the projects from the county transportation commissions that they anticipate over the next few decades. We've put together the federal projects and investments list, and we're ready to begin running this big giant travel demand model shortly that tells us kind of how we're doing, how our plan will perform in 2050 with the best information we have at hand today. This presentation is about the growth and land use inputs to that. A lot of this stuff has been seen by CEHD before. We're sharing it again now because this is probably the last opportunity that we have to do a little bit more of a deep discussion before it goes into the draft plan in October. We want to make sure we have kind of all our ducks in the row and understanding on the inputs and the process so that we can work together to kind of get this plan working. In April, we sent a receive and file item here to the CEHD and Regional Council on this, but we gave a bit of a report on how our overall 2050 growth numbers shake out. And the title illustrates this pretty well, even perhaps a linkage to some of the comments in the last item. Slower growth, steady improvement was kind of the theme for the mid-level scenario that we had. And this does reflect that to a degree, what we're seeing from the demographic side of things is that long-range planning, it's still about new people and growth to a certain degree, but certainly quite a bit substantially less than before, the focus being a little bit more on quality of life overall. The land use and growth portion has a specific technical name in statute, the forecasted regional development pattern. And to get there, we put together something of a growth vision, and this is really what helps us bridge the local with the state targets. It's what we call a growth prioritization scale, which I'll go into a little bit and shared a bit before, but also the local data exchange, the process whereby we try to meet with pretty much every local jurisdiction in the SCAG region. And today we're going to evaluate it. I'll just give a very high-level overview of a couple of the key points that we shared with our technical working group last month on this. And the target that we're most concerned with, that we focus on most, is the greenhouse gas emissions reduction target from the State Air Resources Board, which is a 19% reduction below 2005 levels from light and medium duty vehicles. So evaluating that takes the collective effort of everything. Like I mentioned, we have a very heavyweight travel demand model that integrates all of these other transportation network components, all of the much more updated kind of socioeconomic surveys, even some location-based services data, the cell phone mobility stuff, to kind of parse a little bit of how people are moving today. And we've got a pretty extensive working groups and panels to get all the technical pieces in a row here. But right now, we're just sharing a little bit more of a sketch kind of evaluation to again, make progress on how the growth and land use side is in here. It speaks to greenhouse gases to a degree, but it speaks really to these regional policies as well. Some of what Elizabeth mentioned is in the way of 15-minute communities, housing the region, priority development areas, and sustainable development overall. And frankly, how we're evolving, how we're coming from Connect SoCal 2020 over to Connect SoCal 2024. So first, to recap the regional growth projection, in the last plan, we projected about 19% population growth, and this is over a 30-year period, 2016 to 2045. Right now, we're about 4 years beyond that, but it's about 3 decades worth of growth. About a 25% increase in households and about a 19% increase in total jobs. We developed preliminary projections with the help of a couple of consultants and a panel of about 15 experts, demographic and economic experts, sent these up to policy committees in early 2022. Note that now we're expecting roughly about half the level of population growth as we had in the last plan, just a shade below the level of household growth, and a fair bit lower job growth. You notice that you can grow jobs without people to a certain degree, more couples working, more working age folks retiring later, et cetera, but only to a point. So the job growth numbers are lower, largely because the population growth numbers are lower. So we met with 164 local jurisdictions, got data back from 148 of them, and got growth forecast data specifically back from 132 of them. And this is where we're at after review and after kind of cranking everything together, aggregating everybody's input. First, it passes technical muster, we'd say. A lot of what this region level, kind of high level 30,000-foot view, 2050 approach is about balancing households, employment, and population, making sure that you have enough people for the jobs, enough housing for the people in the long run. So we're well within the initial high and low ranges that we set out with our panel of experts a little over a year ago. The other key point is that both households and employment both went up a little bit. So they often change in opposite directions. The household number goes down, the employment number goes up. But if they both go up or they both go down, you've got a little bit better balance overall. So that checks out. And you've got relatively stable relationships between people and jobs. Like I mentioned before, you can grow jobs to a certain degree without population increases, but there's a bit of a ceiling on that. So the bottom line is that we're in relatively good shape here. But what is especially noteworthy is the increase in the household projection actually following local review. It's definitely a significant departure from past planning cycles where local review actually tends to yield a lower household total. Put differently, the aggregate view of the region's jurisdictions is that we'll grow by 1.6 million additional households by 2050, which is higher than the expert panel's projection, which was already, I would say, on the optimistic side of 1.46 million additional households. One last difference I'll illustrate here is the timing of these new numbers. What I'm showing here is the growth that's expected in the first half of a 30-year plan. So in the last plan, we had about 837,000 units, households in the first half of the plan. This time we've got about 1.1 million units in the first half of the plan. So it's a little bit more front-loaded in addition to that. Why? Well, by projecting new housing a little bit sooner, not only do we help to accommodate the modest growth in population that's expected over the long-range horizon, but it's also a little bit more of a plan to alleviate some of the effects of past housing undersupply by the mid-2030s. We call that existing housing need, a term tossed a lot around during the RHNA days some years ago. In the late 2030s, 2040s, we definitely expect to need a lot less new housing to accommodate population growth. There's going to be relatively slow population growth globally, nationally, and in the region by that time is what we're forecasting. So front loading is really good piece to kind of feature in the strategy here. So those were the regional results. I want to kind of get into how we get to this development pattern, how we actually get to the small area, how this can manifest itself in neighborhoods. So we use 4 main kind of spatial scales or levels to help generate this regional development pattern. And this requires at various levels a range of expertise. Like I mentioned, at the region and county level, it's more kind of expert panel. It's looking at how SCAG region compares to the nation in terms of the job outlook, aging, fertility, things like that. Whereas when you get to the smaller levels, it's about sites. It's a local jurisdiction knowledge kind of an issue for the most part. So there's a little bit of a differentiation at each of these levels here. And we get a little bit more vague, to be honest, when we get to the jurisdiction and even the neighborhood levels, transportation analysis zones, for example. We only look at 2019, 2035, 2050, rather than the full suite of intermediate years, intermediate characteristics, et cetera. So these smaller scales here, especially the TAZ or transportation analysis zone, gives us a little bit of a lingua franca, to kind of understand, be able to compare to a certain degree apples to apples across the region. One size fits all is not the intent at all, but for kind of a data perspective, for an illustrative perspective, this is the scale that we work at to show how some regional strategies could be reflected in neighborhoods for going out to cities and seeing how that looks. So here's the statutory language I mentioned. Really what we're up to here for Connect SoCal is a forecasted regional development pattern that when you integrate it with transportation, with other strategies, hits the greenhouse gas target by 2035 in this case, and also addresses a lot of those other regional policy goals that the policy committees have been working on. Statute doesn't specify one of these scales that it operates. It's not a region level. It's not necessarily a jurisdiction level or a TAS level development pattern. It's more about the policies, strategies, and process that it takes to get there. So we start with a preliminary version of this. This is what we put out for local review based on the last plan and some new information. And then we go out with the local data exchange, and we like I mentioned, try to meet with as many folks as we can. We had a pretty good share, a little bit lower than last cycle, but again, as you probably know well, staffing issues and time commitments and everything are just not what they used to be. So we feel we did pretty good outreach effort to the extent that we could. A slight drop in the number of one-on-one meetings. So that's what we've got now, which is the locally reviewed version. Again, our modeling team is going to put a lot more detail in there than just to do the modeling, and that's going to be the draft plan, population by age, race, ethnicity, school enrollment, income, household types, and size, basically to simulate what 2050 is going to look like. We'll put that out in October, formal public comment periods, and then hopefully in April, we anticipate putting it up for adoption. So, how does the growth vision do this? How do we get there? How do we match these, kind of state targets, regional policies, and actually local vision? Previously we had gone out to the cities and then got all the input back and then reshuffled to a certain degree. We said, well, let's put more in priority development areas. Let's put less in kind of environmental risk types of areas. And then we called that the plan. That was not as effective to a certain degree because it was a little bit unclear what the process was that we were doing at the outset, and local jurisdictions didn't have the opportunity to comment on what already had kind of baked some of the plans, policies, and strategies of a regional plan into it. So this time we flipped it around. We basically did a preliminary allocation that takes into account some of the regional strategies. We looked at everybody's general plans to the extent we could, entitlements, existing land uses, and if available, now again, not a huge share were available, but housing element updates as of about February 2022. Elizabeth probably knows off the top of her head the number that we're in at any given point. I would gladly defer to her for that. I think we're a little bit over half now that are completed and adopted and certified, but it was lower then, so we estimated as best we could to gauge the capacity. This is really the supply side. So we're trying to match supply and demand here, putting everything together. And the policy element comes in with what we call this growth prioritization scale. PDAs and GRAs, priority development areas and green region or resource areas. So we kind of went in order. We increased to the extent that it's possible within existing plan documents, within our existing knowledge, growth in priority development areas. Things like NMAs, neighborhood mobility areas related to 15-minute communities. Things like transit priority areas, TPAs. We held off on, you may recall HQTAs or high quality transit areas. That's a bit of a broader definition. TPAs are a little bit of a narrow area around major transit stops because, as I think a lot of the discussion is, transit is one part of many parts of a solution in terms of kind of complete communities and complete transportation options, and also spheres of influence for unincorporated areas. On the opposite side, we generally tried to decrease in this approach, but definitely not preclude growth, particularly when you have multiple of these resource areas listed here. Say, for example, a coastal inundation zone and a wildlife habitat and an open space in park. It might be all right, if you have one, maybe two of these, but as they kind of accumulate over, that's when you start to get more environmental risk and start to get a little bit less consistent with some of the SB 375 language on resource areas here. So that's the basic idea of what we took to the cities. And you can see kind of how this looks like in a continuum from dark green to dark pink here. Just to compare a rough guide, across Southern California, based on these SB 375 requirements, to a degree regional policies, to give a flavor of what it looks like to open this discussion with cities. As a general observation, certainly you've got a pretty small share of land area in these, in these darkest of green. And I put this up here just for illustration. The further detail is linked in the technical working group from last month. I'm always happy to follow up as well. But fairly small amount of overall land area. SCAG is vast, and these areas also include farmland, military installations, tribal land, national parks and forests, areas not necessarily, really front and center when you think of kind of urban growth. PDAs, priority development areas, are about 10% of the region's land area. So what do we have here? We have somewhat of a maximization. We're starting with a maximization approach to kind of help link local plans as we understand them with these targets. And then we went out with a data review and verification form. This is kind of the best piece of bridging here. You know, we asked cities, hey, are we using your right underlying data for general plan? Do you have suggestions for a differently conceived of, say, neighborhood mobility area, so something like that that works in your jurisdiction? So it gave cities a chance to update a lot of the ingredients and also comment on the growth totals. So about 10% of jurisdictions said, okay, that looks great. Let's just go with what you have. 56% made some revisions, some minor, some major, and 33% were not able to provide forecast input. We also kind of asked for a little bit of clarification, you know, for changes so that we can try to weave local policies, local considerations into our numbers. You know, hey, if there is more growth in, say, a green region area, are there local policies? For example, a home hardening, egress, things like that in a fire hazard zone? Or do you have a different idea about neighborhood mobility or about getting around, perhaps even, you know, about kind of the nature of telework and workers in your area? Drop us a note here. And the one-on-one aspect of this really helped. We had individual follow-ups with 21 jurisdictions just to kind of talk and clarify, you know, before rolling everything in together. And that was actually a pretty productive activity afterwards, really making it more of a local data exchange process, trying to reduce any top-down aspect to the extent we can. So that brings us to this evaluation. How do we get a path towards sustainable land use in 2050? And how do we express this in a way that doesn't make everybody's head spin? Because there are a lot of pieces in here, a lot of overlapping objectives and what have you. But the bottom line, let's just take a quick look because it's cognitively simple at this middle graph here. How many of our households are currently in what you'd call a priority development area? About 59% by this measure. In our growth, in the 2019 through 2050 growth that we're projecting, that's 65.2%. So by 2050, in theory, you know, you're getting a slightly higher share of the whole region that's in a priority development area. On the converse, you have the same thing in these resource areas, a slightly lower share at the end of the day in 2050 that's in a green region area. You know, to a degree, you got kind of a gold standard that combines the two. What's a priority area that's also not in kind of some of these environmental hazard types of overlays. That tended to, you know, that tends to go up a fair bit here. 30% currently, 38% in terms of the growth. So that's just overall the logic. These may be somewhat small changes, I would say, but in Connect SoCal 2020, the land use element, which again was it was featured, but I'd say it's featured a little bit more strongly this time around, contributed roughly the same amount to greenhouse gas emissions reductions as both congestion pricing strategies and as EV charging strategies region-wide. So relatively large, you know, overall. I can happy to share those results from last plan as well, but that hopefully gives at least a little bit of a sense. You know, this is really the last piece here. How does it compare as we evolve from the 2020 plan to this kind of maximization approach I mentioned that we took internally to a much more robust, locally reviewed approach? And here we're just looking at the final Connect SoCal from last time, the preliminary, and then the locally reviewed version. Excuse me. And you know, you can see if you just look at the left cluster of bars there that yeah, we're a little bit lower than the maximized amount, but we're quite a bit above where we were in Connect SoCal 2020. For example, how much household growth is in multiple priority development areas. That would be, say, neighborhood connectivity is high and transit access is high, as an example. You know, we had 35.8% of the household growth in there last time. Now it's up to 38%. And I think one of the strengths here, you know, is that we've kind of taken this approach before meeting with local jurisdictions, given the opportunity to kind of work it into the plan, squeezing a little bit more out of some of the approaches that we took in Connect SoCal 2020 and building on that. So I probably don't need to go into a little bit more of the county detail, but I'm happy to if you'd like. Generally, the pattern repeats itself across most of the region, with a couple of exceptions where there was a little bit more local engagement or a little bit less. For example, some Orange County, for example, you see looks a little bit different in terms of the shape there. That's because they really did a great job of getting into those priority development areas and making local edits. So that's why the preliminary version looks worse there, because we're just looking at their final PDAs. Quick note as well, there is another item in your packet, item 5, that talks about the local data exchange survey. So, you know, the LDX wasn't just quantitative information. It wasn't just data. There was a survey component covering land use, transportation, environmental information, public health, and equity. Some of the general themes, just to kind of give a bit of a flavor to that side of the LDX process. You know, cities reported generally that they were pretty understaffed, under-resourced. You know, funding and community buy-in were also some of the other impediments that they saw toward implementing Connect SoCal, toward kind of realizing some of these things from the last plan and certainly the future one as well. You know, about half of the respondents reported that additional grant or budget funding would be helpful in this regard. And also kind of citing some of the reasons why housing production goals remain unmet, to try to think of how we might be able to address these. Lack of land, lack of developer interest, lack of funding for affordable housing, public opposition, probably preaching to the choir on some of these points here. But that's just kind of a bit of a flavor of how we're trying to get a little bit more of the local perspectives in here as well. So to wrap up, in terms of the overall assessment, the forecast overall, the development pattern overall, is really especially strong in housing. I think I was on a meeting with a handful of other demographers across the state on Tuesday. A gentleman who had been doing this since the mid-60s said that this is the first time that after local review, the household number went up. So congratulations on that regard. That was definitely an interesting facet and nice to see here. There are near universal improvements in the region and the county over the final Connect SoCal 2020 on some of these really basic measures. Again, we're not going to know all of the details until we run really detailed models, but we're generally trending in the right direction. Hopefully have put a more transparent process out there. You can see your city's numbers anytime through the regional data platform. We've also shared this with the technical working group too. So it's hopefully pretty clear here. The next steps, again, are the draft plan release, really, in October of 2023. Again, all this information is out there, and you know, happy to chat at any point on it. You know, last thing I'll kind of reiterate here is that the development pattern is intended to be a little bit more process-based. The data are illustrative. This is one way that you kind of match regional strategies, state targets with local goals. It's not intended to prescribe. It's intended to kind of guide. As our planning director, Sarah Jepson, likes to say, Connect SoCal is more of a compass than a roadmap. So that spirit is taken in here as well. So that's all I've got, and thank you for your time. Happy to entertain any discussion or questions.
Thank you, Dr. Kane. I will now entertain comments from members of the CEHD committee. Keith, Ike, you have a question? You have a comment? All right. Do any members of the CEHD committee attending here in person have any comments? I call on Don.
Thank you. This is my first committee meeting where it's just this group, but I'm an architect and an urban planner, and my career is about, well, let's just say it's a little more than 40 years. And I was the campus architect for University of California, Riverside. And this is a subject matter that's near and dear to my heart. There are many of these goals and objectives that I can really embrace. I mean, on my campus, a 10-minute walk was what we, had. And I just got back from Europe, spent a week in Amsterdam, and and I've been in London and Stockholm and all those places where the public transportation system is amazing, but crime is almost non-existent. So those things that were said earlier, I think were well-founded observations. But one thing that I would observe about this that I would like to dig into more, because I'm looking at this stuff for the first time, is that when you do a 30-year plan, you're out there in a very multi-variable universe. And the reality of planning is that the closer you get to the period of time you're talking about, like the next 3 to 5 years, now you got something that you can, create some proof of the pudding, because everything will be different 30 years from now. So when you're making big decisions, which you do have to look down and Ouija, big decisions and regional decisions from a longer viewpoint, you also have to take into consideration that the world is changing. So one time, a number of years ago, many, many decades, 100 years or more, we had the Industrial Revolution, and it changed everything in terms of jobs. Well, I'm curious as to what are we doing in terms of, and maybe we are, be great. What are we doing in terms of looking at AI, artificial intelligence? What is that going to do? I just read an article in the Kiplinger letter, which is a forecast letter, and only a 100-year-old organization. And if it's a big question mark. And it's not going to happen overnight, but we could be a lot different world 15 years from now, 10 or 15 years from now. And we're in a 30-year window that we're trying to predict. And if jobs in tech and all kinds of things, our professions, you name it, if they all take a different kind of departure, then it could affect the number of jobs, which affects the number of households, which affects the population, which affects all of those things. And I kind of wonder, are we really looking at those things, or are we just prognosticating on the basis of, well, this is the way it is right now. This is the demands we see in the next 3 years. So we're going to just Ouija board that out, some distance that's way out there, and the world may be a whole lot different. And I guess I would start with that. I'm going to have to dig into this because to me, the proof is in the pudding. It's in the details, not the big global, this is what we predict kind of thing, because I don't know if there's a staying power to make all those things happen.
If I may just really quickly to a couple of those, and thanks so much for that. There's certainly, I would say, a difference in practice when you're doing a short to medium range economic forecast. And that's an instance where you're just kind of extrapolating the last few years of trends or something. The tools for looking 30 years into the future are different. They're births, deaths, and migration, on the demographic side. So that's why demographics is emphasized a little bit more heavily here than you might otherwise. And how does Southern California fundamentally compare to the rest of the nation? And even the world in terms of growth outlook. So it's relative in that sense. And those are kind of two underpinnings to a degree. One of the things that the kind of the panel of experts that we kicked this off with, about a year and a half ago, noted is that it's really hard to envision the state or region being a smaller portion of the national and global economy in the future. That's been prognosticated before, and time again, we've come back to a certain degree. So that's one facet just to kind of illustrate. I'd say too, overall in our regional planning process, we try as best we can to get input from a number of groups, from a number of expert groups. The Global Land Use and Economic Council, GLEW, which the Honorable lowercase h Lucy Dunn here is the leader of. Is one example. Our quarterly economic roundtable, where we try to kind of get into AI or kind of the tech economy, or another facet, healthcare and social assistance, by far the highest growth job sector as we look to 2050. So the tools are a little bit different, I'd say, but there's obviously a limitation, and we start with a very broad high and low range, and we try to use as much of these information and discussions as we can to inform the fairly limited levers that we have to pull in terms of looking at what 2050 is. Again, that bar chart of total population, total households, total employment, that can change a bunch, but even the more detailed stuff that we don't show, that we don't have as part of the discourse, can change dramatically. So I guess it's a tough task, but we do our best, and thanks for the point.
Thank you for those comments, Don Caskey. And I call on Kathleen Kelly.
This is a follow-up question. To what extent do the tools for identifying priority growth areas allow us to take account of environmental threats and risks? In my context, I think about the Coachella Valley's dependence on Colorado River water to replenish the aquifer. That's my context. I'm sure there are comparable factors in other contexts. So to what extent do our tools recognize environmental risks and threats, which we are all experiencing to have increasing relevance, especially as we hear that the nation's primary insurer of homes is no longer taking new clients in California.
Thank you for that, and kind of to comment on PDAs and how PDAs are put together. With that in mind, a priority development area is extremely different, whether it's in Palm Desert or say West Hollywood. Given that we have such a massively diverse region, that has to be taken into account. So the terms have to be fairly general, and that's why we put them out for local review as well, to see if we can get some sense of what are the areas that are generally consistent with kind of more complete communities, maybe some more non-single occupant vehicle travel options for not just work trips, but for other kind of recreation, schools, what have you. So they're a little bit broad, and they're, I would say, a little bit more kind of neighborhood and place oriented even than they have been in past cycles. I'd say that the strongest consideration of environmental risk, environmental threats, water supply, even you could perhaps toss in there, is that we our main performance measure here, as I showed in a couple of those bar charts, is the combination of them, not just a PDA, but a PDA that is outside of most of these other kind of environmental threat types of areas. So I think that's one substantive improvement that I think we've made and made clearer in Connect SoCal 2024 that kind of does that. I don't think we have really as much of an explicit consideration in this growth pattern here of water and infrastructure demand and everything. I don't know that we have the tools, again, as the previous gentleman mentioned, to look 30 years into the future and say, well, this particular small area has more of a water resource risk than the next small area over. So to a degree, we kind of rely on a little bit more general and a little bit more kind of local input, local review for those factors. But hopefully that's we've considered this a little bit more and happy to kind of keep that discussion going, keep it under consideration.
Thank you, Kathleen, and thank you, Dr. Kane. Moving on. Oh, okay, we have from Lucy Dunn, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kevin, great presentation. Thank you so much for this. Could you pull back to the macro for me? I mean, I get this is a lot of micro discussion, but I'm really interested in when you look at USGS maps of California, again, macro, we got about 100 million acres in the state. 50% is fully protected as public open space owned by the state or federal government, right? Angeles Forest, Mojave Desert, redwoods. 45% of our state is in agricultural production or private open space. About 6% of our land in all of California is commercial, industrial, and residential development for 40 million people. Now, the SCAG region is a highly metropolitan area. I'm just curious as to, can you share those macro percentages? What percent of the SCAG region is fully protected open space where we know we can't build, agriculture production, and then the balance, that percentage that you're having to play with to limit our opportunities here and to congratulate cities for doing the right thing. So.
That's thank you for that. That's a really tricky denominator, I guess, yes. Right? What do you look at is potential for urban growth or realistic for urban growth over what could be? I'm not looking for I'm just looking for the what is now, because I know the future can be anything. So just the what is now as a baseline in my head when we've got half the state's population right here.
So that's all.
Yeah. I don't think I'd have that offhand. I would have to check, to be perfectly honest, with you on some of these, some of the green region list there and the shares of it. By and large, the general sense is right. And again, I would say, is land area the consideration, or some urbanizable type of land area? So, yeah.
I would love to chat with you.
Great, for sure.
Okay, again, thank you for that presentation, Dr. Kane, and we'll move on to information item number 9, Inclusive Economic Recovery Strategy Grant Update. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on this item?
Mr. Chair, I'm not seeing anyone in person or any hands up on Zoom.
Thank you, Ms. Macias. This is an information item. In July 2021, SCAG's Regional Council adopted the Inclusive Economic Recovery Strategy. SCAG received a $3.5 million grant from the state to implement a series of IERS recommendations. The projects being completed under this grant effort support SCAG's goal to build a more equitable and inclusive economy for all in the region. Today, staff will provide an update on the IERS projects. We have Anna Van, Associate Regional Planner, and Gigi Moreno, Senior Economist of SCAG, and I turn it over to Anna Van and Gigi Moreno.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, CEHD Committee. I'm Anna Van, Associate Regional Planner here at SCAG, and I'll be presenting alongside Dr. Gigi Moreno, SCAG Senior Economist. We'll be presenting on an update to you all on the Inclusive Economic Recovery Strategy Grant. So the COVID-19 pandemic presented unexpected shocks in all our lives. It highlighted the inequities in the system, as most communities the communities who were most at risk were communities of color and lower income communities. In response to this, the SCAG Regional Council adopted the Inclusive Economic Recovery Strategy, or IERS, in July 2021 and they put forth a vision and strategies for a more inclusive approach to economic development. SCAG strategy development was guided by 5 core principles, with the primary intent to foster more economic opportunities for women and communities of color, and to narrow the economic disparities that exist in the current local and regional economies. The IRS report included over 50 recommendations developed in collaboration with community stakeholders. With support from Senator Susan Rubio, SCAG received one-time grant funding to implement a small portion of those projects and recommendations, the really high-impact projects and deliverables. There's a slate of projects that we're working on under this grant. These projects leverage SCAG's influence in regional planning to support ongoing economic development efforts. And it also sets the path to further integrate inclusive economic growth in SCAG's core work, the Connect SoCal plan. Last month, Gigi provided an update on one of these projects, which is the Job Quality Index, and today we'll be sharing more about 5 other projects with you. So COVID really highlighted the disparities between high wage workers and low wage workers or jobs. Low wage workers experienced economic and social shocks such as job loss and increased risk of exposure, as most of them had to perform their jobs in person. The family supporting job plans came out of an effort to ensure we're preparing a resilient workforce by expanding access to living wage jobs. This effort will identify living wage jobs and really address the question, what are the stable jobs that pay enough to support a family in each county of our region? We are partnering with the California Community Centers of Excellence to complete this work. 5 COEs from across the region will conduct labor market research and analysis, building off the Orange County COE's report on resilient jobs. So once the jobs have been identified, we're going to ground truth the analysis through community engagement. We'll be working with the High Road Transition Collaborative as part of the Community Economic Resilience Fund, or SURF effort in LA, San Bernardino, Riverside, and Orange counties. And for Ventura and Imperial, we'll be working with CBOs. We really want to know what are the jobs that the community want us to prioritize. And from there, we'll develop educational and career pathways. These findings and recommendations will be summarized into 5 sub-regional implementation plans, and we're expecting to release them in the fall of this year. So here's a sample of the jobs that the Orange County COE has identified so far. And as I mentioned earlier, it builds off the COE's report on resilient jobs and jobs for recovery methodology, which identified jobs that remain resilient during the Great Recession of 2008 and the COVID-19 pandemic recession. What this means is that this category of jobs experienced less job losses during the recession and higher job gains post-recession. And they must meet the criteria of paying a living wage according to the MIT Living Wage Calculator. To be considered a family supporting job, the methodology takes into account household composition. For example, in Orange County, the average household consists of 2 adults and 1 child. And according to MIT Living Wage Calculator, an earning of $25.57 per hour is necessary to sustain a family of that size in Orange County. As so, what you see here is a list of jobs that meet this criteria as identified by the COE. In working with community colleges, we're really trying to hone in on jobs that don't require a bachelor degree. And keep in mind, this is an ongoing work effort, and we'll keep iterating this list as we talk to the community and gather feedback along the way. So I know that was a lot of technical information, so take a deep breath. We're halfway there. Now, the Human Capital Needs Assessment will build upon the engagement from the Family Supporting Jobs plans. More than likely, the discussion of barriers to accessing jobs will come up during our engagement. This report will document the barriers and identify solutions to addressing them. There's a lot of great work being done at the local level to serve our workers and provide wraparound services. At the regional level, we're really asking how can we support our subregions and facilitate partnerships to ensure the best outcomes for residents. So SCAG will hire consultants to help us with this project. We just released the RFP last week. And we envision this project being a collaborative effort with community-based organizations who will tell us what are the key priority areas they want to focus on and solutions for addressing them. We'll also be partnering with them to ensure that we're truly reaching communities who are truly facing these barriers, such as lower income communities and communities of color. So we will produce a report with recommendations and best practices. These recommendations will be tied to existing funding sources where applicable, or may result in additional recommendations for new funding sources and partnerships. And we expect to complete this project in the spring of 2024. And finally, we've heard a lot about improving quality of life for residents today and fostering job growth. And another important aspect of this grant is to support our small businesses, specifically minority-owned, women-owned, and veteran-owned. This is an important undertaking because access to government contracting and major institution supply chains provide reliable business and opportunities for business expansion. SCAG has contracted with RHNA advisors to assist with the development of these toolkits. And as part of this effort, we'll be building on local best practices, such as the City of LA's RAMP platform or Compete for LA. We'll be convening small business organizations to truly understand the barriers that small business suppliers face in accessing contracting opportunities. And because we really want these toolkits to be used and implemented, we'll be convening contracting professionals from the private and public sector to understand their needs from the buyer standpoint. In other words, what are the barriers that they face in advancing this work? So if your jurisdiction is interested in contributing to the project or being involved, feel free to reach out to me. My info will be at the end of this presentation. The two toolkits will include best practices and templates for anchor institutions and public sector agencies to utilize in building a more inclusive contracting and procurement ecosystem. And we're expecting to complete this work in the October of this year. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Gigi Moreno.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you. And what I will talk about is the two more economic data-based projects as part of this, the Inclusive Economic Recovery Strategy. And the first one is the Tribal Data Needs Assessment. Tribal governments and native serving organizations are often asked to make policy and economic decisions without access to the data or full array of data that other government entities typically rely on. So for example, economic and demographic data that, census data, BLS data, CDC data that we often rely on for making policy decisions. And so these data are often incomplete and not inclusive with respect to tribal communities. And this might be due to the small sample sizes in these surveys, or it might be due to the way that researchers report data that do not fully encompass Native Americans. So this project will be this project will assess tribal community data needs. And so what we'll be doing is we're answering the question, where are the data gaps for tribal communities and how do we fill those gaps? But this project is only the first step in driving policy change in a way that provides tribal leaders and Native-led organizations greater access to data resources and tools to meet their own needs as sovereign governing entities. A key part of this approach is to engage tribal governments and Native serving organizations to assess their economic data needs. We will produce a report that synthesizes the findings and proposes actionable strategies for building data tools with tribal communities in mind as the primary audience for these tools. The last project that I want to talk about is our efforts to measure the economic impacts of equitable and inclusive economic development in Southern California. The goal of this project is to measure the impacts of eliminating inequities in the SCAG region workforce. So the question that we're answering in this project is, how would the SCAG region economy change if we were to eliminate the race and gender wage gap that we observe in our region? So a number of studies have tackled this question for the US as a whole. For example, studies from McKinsey Consulting, studies from the RAND Corporation, and the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. So in our study, we apply the methods that the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco did for their US study. So we applied their methods to the SCAG region in our counties using county and SCAG region data. Our very, very preliminary results are shown in the table here. And the approach, the big picture approach is to take GDP under actual or current conditions, so I'm calling that the actual, and we compare that GDP to GDP in a counterfactual world in which the wage gap between white men and other groups is completely eliminated. So that would be in the third and fourth columns of that table that you see there. And so we say, well, what's the difference between this actual GDP where we have wage gaps as observed and this counterfactual world where we've completely eliminated wage gaps? How will GDP change for the entire region? And what we're finding right now is we see that GDP would be 15% bigger, would have been 15% bigger in 2021 had we completely eliminated the wage gap by race and gender. And so we will continue to explore this. These are preliminary results, and we will continue to explore and fine tune these data to account for differences in occupations and differences by age and various other differences that we're going to look at. And we'll continue working on this, and we expect to finish this work by the end of the year. And I'd be happy to discuss the specific methods. I don't want to get into the technical part here. And we're happy to also entertain any questions and comments about all of our work related to the inclusive economic recovery strategy. So thank you.
Thank you. I will now entertain comments from members of the CEHD committee. Andrew Maciel.
The map that you showed, of the Southern California tribes. So is it all those tribes in that region, or is it just the SCAG regional?
It's a SCAG region only tribes.
Okay, because that map shows some of the San Diego tribes.
Okay. Yeah. So I think the map was more illustrative than complete.
Well, I'd
Thank
like
you.
to volunteer to help out.
Well, that would be wonderful.
Kind of know a lot of those tribes and the communities. So
Wonderful. And so we'll definitely, we'll be in touch. And yes, I think it's important for us to talk to tribal leaders and get input. That's going to be a key part of that project.
because we have a regional group called the Tribal Alliance of Sovereign Nations, and they meet once a month. I think you're familiar with that group, but we could actually agendize this and introduce you to the body. And that body, the regional body, is Riverside County tribes, San Bernardino County, a portion of Imperial, and then the tribes along the Colorado River, Pachon, Chemehuevi, and so forth.
Wonderful. Can we talk after?
Sure.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
I only charge by the hour.
Thank you for your volunteerism, Mr. Maciel. Andrew Serega.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to those MIT numbers, the $25 living wages in Orange County, is that for a family basically dual working, or is that for a single working parent to be able to sustain a family in Orange County on $25?
That's for dual.
Dual, okay. And do you know when those numbers were put out?
Yeah, that's for 2022.
Okay, so my issue with that is $25 an hour, even in a dual working family. There's only very specific areas within Orange County that would be a reality. I mean, they did a study a little while ago to be a median normal type family in Orange County. The household needs to be making about $250,000 a year. So my question is, if we go off those numbers, which I don't feel reflect the reality of Orange County, and I don't even know the numbers for other regions, are we planning for failure by using numbers that don't accurately reflect the reality of that region?
That's a really good point, and something that we are considering throughout this study. The MIT living wage calculator, I'm not an expert on it, but it does take into account various costs of living. For example, how much childcare would cost, cost of food, cost of living. So we'll try our best to go back to the COEs and kind of reanalyze those numbers.
Okay. And then in the inclusive contracting toolkits, obviously we're looking at economic development and we want to bring jobs that pay higher wages. How do we encourage that, or what plan do we have to actually encourage that within the region? Because a lot of the jobs that I've seen brought in have been done with subsidies provided by government agencies, whether it's tax sharing agreements or whatever
the case might be. By very definition, a subsidy provided to an entity means that it's not sustainable or unattractive to be brought into that region absent those subsidies. So the question is, if we're looking at sustainability and economic development, how do we do that without basically granting those subsidies, or what would make it attractive for businesses to come in to actually provide jobs in the region?
I think that's a really good question. For this study, we're focusing also on anchor institutions, so private sector, how small businesses can leverage the private sector, like hospitals, universities, their supply chain. But also for government, we understand there's a lot of funding coming down. So this will kind of address that, the subsidy side, but also long-term other opportunities for small businesses to leverage the bigger contracts that aren't always based on subsidies.
Okay.
So I need to unmute myself first. Elizabeth Carvajal, Deputy Director. I think part of what this toolkit is lifting up, and as we're thinking about comprehensive economic development, is creating more contracting opportunities for more small businesses across the region, including veteran, minority, women-owned business. So that's part of this more comprehensive strategy that is not so much about a subsidy, but about creating access. And so I think this is a great toolkit that's looking at public sector, private sector to help facilitate more access to those contracting opportunities that are outside of a subsidy, and really looking at more accessibility to those contracts opportunities. And Anna, let me know if I've, yeah, thank you.
So on that point, is there a metric that we're looking at that we can judge the success of the program by? Is there a percentage of minority-owned businesses or women-owned businesses that we're looking to target with the toolkit to be able to create that equity? Because again, in an equitable universe, there's a finite amount, 100%. If 70% is given to one segment of the population, what are the metrics that we're looking at to say we've achieved equitability within, the goals that we've set?
Yeah, being able to measure is always so important to understand if we have success. And the team can provide further clarification. I think the key point here is starting with first identifying what are the barriers and the processes and the systems we can create to start creating more accessibility. And certainly as we evaluate that, we can assess what metrics we want to use to measure success. Until we know what those barriers are and the changes are, it's hard to define this is how we're going to measure that success. So this is really kind of starting with setting the groundwork to look at those practices that we need to adjust to create more contracting opportunities for those folks. So it's more preliminary, and team can let me know if.
I think also longer term. So a lot of these toolkits are helping to identify and reduce barriers to some of the job growth. And I think the job quality index, which I talked about actually it was in April, will be a metric to help measure our success or help measure our progress. So that would be a tool that we could use as a metric that we could use to help measure where we are after implementing these policies or implementing these programs.
And do you have a timeline for when you'd like to be able to identify those barriers and be able to implement the changes?
So, well, this project needs to be finished by next summer. So we'll have the toolkits completed. I think you said by the end of this year?
Right. So we'll have the toolkits completed in October, and we're starting stakeholder engagement with the small business organizations in the summer of this year. And to uplift your point, we're currently finding that there's no data collection around contracting opportunities, especially measuring the success of programs, and that is part of the barrier and part of the issue. And we're hoping that these toolkits will address exactly what you're saying.
So, I mean, just to kind of wrap it up, for me, the biggest issue that I've seen with a lot of government programs is that we implement programs and we never track them after to see if they've been successful or not. And I think that's inefficient and it wastes a lot of time and money. So, a more focused approach to where we can have set metrics developed as we move forward with this plan to be able to see if it's been successful, and if it hasn't, what changes need to be made to achieve the success that this body or the region as a whole is looking for.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Adele Andrade Stadler.
Yeah, just a real quick comment. Thank you so much. I just wanted to say that sometimes a second language is a barrier, but it is also an asset. And so in my community, it's an asset. And I would take a look at including that as a potential jobs that would increase. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank
Hello,
you.
this is Dave.
Okay, Miss Lucy Dunn.
Thank you. Just one more question for you. Does any of this analysis also include developing a pod of regulatory constraints that are impacting the ability of small business to do this contracting or to increase living wage or whatever? In other words, all the economic data is fine, but one of the biggest issues is it's California, and regulation is you may not even know when a small business can't even start up because they can't overcome that. Would you be looking at that aspect as well?
Yes, we'll definitely be looking into.
And so I would love to see that as a separate pod, because I think that will get your constituency excited that you've identified these constraints to the creation of small businesses and new jobs and the ability to grow income. Yeah.
Thank you.
I wanted to do a time check. It's 11:16 and we have one more important agenda item after this. Annie Marshall, did you have a comment?
Yes, thank you very much. Looking at SCAG, needing to look at I'm sorry, my phone is giving me feedback. Emerging issues is this whole deal with crime that's going on. And for a small business, crime is very important. They're closing their doors because of all the snatch and grabs. You have large box stores that are closing up. And I think we need to look at that, and because we're looking at quality of life, and the quality of life is really sucking. I don't know if it's across the whole region, but definitely LA County. So I'm not going to want to open a small business in some little town where somebody's going to ram their car through my window and grab all my electronics. I mean, so I don't know how we deal with those kind of quality of life issues, but I don't think we could ignore them. And that kind of goes along with the gentleman earlier about the safety on the buses. Why am I going to, even if they have an ambassador on the bus, why am I going to take that bus? So anyway, just kind of a comment and a concern.
Valerie Amascua.
Thank you. I'm Valerie Amascua. It's my first meeting, so I really appreciate it. I appreciate your comments, and since it was my first meeting, I was not going to speak, but I would love to help you in any way possible, because in my community of Santa Ana, $25 does not get you anything. You can't even rent an apartment with less than $2,200, $2,500. So you're talking 2 adults, 2 children. Our households do not include 2 adults, 2 children. It's usually more than that. So I would love to assist you in any way possible, because I'm looking at with the information that I receive as the mayor, it's more like $35 an hour. And so I just want to be really clear on that. And yes, the second language is an asset, because you can get a job, for example, at the school district as an instructional aide, but Spanish speaking, which means you're going to get paid bilingual pay, which is additional. So, I just want to be a part of that. If I can help you in any way, I'd love to. And then small businesses in Santa Ana, we are really trying to bring them back, because not only did COVID affect them, but also we have the metro the trolley that's going through downtown, and that has pretty much destroyed downtown Santa Ana. And those small businesses are trying to come back. So I'm working with them very closely. So anything I can help you with, please let me know. But $25 in Santa Ana, not even gonna make a difference with 2 incomes of $25. Just want to be clear on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna Van, and thank you, Dr. Gigi Moreno.
Thank you all for your comments.
Information item number 10. RHNA reform process updates. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak on this item?
Mr. Chair, I see no members of the public with raised hands online or any in person.
Thank you, Ms. Macias. This is an information item. SCAG is currently undertaking a RHNA reform process in concurrence with HCD's statewide effort. A set of draft recommendations developed by staff is available online for public review, and staff is currently collecting input. There will also be 2 public virtual listening sessions this month as another opportunity for input on June 22 and June 27. As part of this item, staff will also update the CEHD committee on the HCD-led sounding board, an advisory group of experts for feedback on RHNA reform. Today, we have David Kiobe, Associate Regional Planner, and Mayan Johnson, Housing Program Manager, and they will be presenting. I turn it over to David Kiobe. Turn on the mic.
There we go. Thank you, Chair, and good morning, committee. Today, I'd like to give you an overview of our stakeholder engagement process and our RHNA reform timeline. So our first round of engagement on RHNA reform began in summer 2022, where we held 2 public listening sessions to collect feedback and input. We have since reviewed that feedback and formulated draft recommendations. And this led us to kick off our second round of engagement to receive feedback on the recommendations we developed. As part of that engagement, we launched a survey on May 15th to gauge attitudes towards the recommendations. And just to note, the survey will be open until June 30th. We've also had 2 listening sessions that are scheduled for June 22nd and June 27th. And June 30th marks the end of our second round of engagement. I'd also like to note that on July 1st, HCD will provide a progress report, an update to the legislature. And we plan on coming back to a special CHD meeting in mid-August to present our recommendations on RHNA reform. And then once these pass through CHD, we then plan to bring these recommendations to the Regional Council in September for approval. And once approved, we'll be submitting a comment letter to HCD with our approved recommendations in early September. And finally, HCD will be submitting a report on RHNA reform to the legislature at the end of this year, December 31st, 2023. I'd now like to hand it over to Mayan, who's going to give an overview of the sounding board.
Great. Thank you, David. Good morning. I'm Mayan Johnson, Housing Program Manager at SCAG, and I'll go over the sounding board that was convened as part of HCD's statewide RHNA reform efforts. So the sounding board is an advisory group, so we don't have any decision-making power, but it is made up of experts across the state. So these include representatives from other COGs. It's mostly the major COGs like SACOG, SANDAG, and MTC ABAG, and of course SCAG, but also some members of academia, and also some YIMBY and advocacy groups represented as well. There are a total of 4 meetings that have been scheduled. So we've had 3 of them in May, and the 4th one will be on Monday. So the agendas are posted online at HCD's website prior to each meeting, but they are not open to the public. I think this is part of their, they're trying to bounce ideas off of this group of experts, but also allowing for candid views to be shared as they develop their recommendations as part of the report due at the end of this year. So the topics we've included that have been included so far, we've talked about the regional determination process, such as what sources should be used for cost burden, what constitutes a comparable region. These are factors that are required in state housing law, but it doesn't necessarily define each of the data sources that has to be used in the end result. There's also been discussion on the statutory objectives of RHNA. There are 5 objectives, but then how do we further them, or how do we measure their success when we do our RHNA process and afterwards, so we can continually improve the RHNA methodology. This last the last meeting, we also went over climate change. How can we make it more meaningful in our methodology when we do the factors? And we also explore the role of the factors, since many of you have participated in either SCAG's RHNA process or your local housing element process, but how do land use planning factors and constraints, opportunities and constraints, how do they affect an individual RHNA allocation? So we went over these topics so far, but because our draft recommendations are draft, so it'd be premature for me to talk about them at the meetings themselves, but rather I've advocated things that are beneficial to our agency, what we stand for. So I've been advocating for more transparency in our process. For example, the regional determination process it feels like a black box to many stakeholders. We present a consultation package to HCD and then they make a final decision. But perhaps posting the data sources they use, keeping the public up to date, maybe having a public workshop on it, but whatever it turns out to, we need more transparency in the process to establish the trust. Because if we don't start off with trust, it'll poison the entire process and make it difficult for everybody. And I've also advocated for more flexibility and also simplifying the process. That especially helps me and the housing team. And I'm sure it'll also help you in explaining the process to your constituents. So that wraps up my update for the sounding board, but David and I are more than happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mayan and David. I will be calling on members here in person. I will first be calling on Keith Ike, and then I will be calling on John Mirish.
Thank you for the update. Has any conversation come up on the cost of all of this RHNA process? Just in general, like how much time and how much money? And I speak as coming from a small city, we spent several $100,000s in this process. And I'm just wondering if there's ever a conversation around maybe smaller cities under 100,000 residents shouldn't necessarily participate in these types of things. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. We do acknowledge, especially there's a RHNA process in which we hope our jurisdictions can participate to talk about their local planning factors. But at least for the housing element, that is particularly burdensome on smaller jurisdictions without resources that are competing for the same housing consultants. And so we are looking at more housing element reform in the long term at SCAG, because this is a requirement, RHNA reform for the state as part of AB 101. So it is a statutory requirement they do this, but it's only limited to RHNA topics. So after we adopt the RHNA, then there's a housing element. And I think that is particularly the part that's burdensome. And so that is something we can explore, is how can we help our jurisdictions, how can we make it easier for them to determine housing need without having that disproportionate burden on the smaller jurisdictions. One thing too that we have advocated for, and we do this with our REAP program at SCAG, the Regional Early Action Planning Grant. We have our sub-regional partnership program. So we partnered with our sub-regions. We have several, such as like OCOG, we have Westside Cities COG, WRCOG, but we allocated funding for local projects for housing, for planning housing projects based on their RHNA allocation. So we're trying to put more money according to the RHNA allocation, knowing that the more RHNA you have, the larger your task in, for example, housing element development. So going into REAP 2, we have that same concept for SRP 2, but we will continue to explore ways to ensure that our jurisdictions are well supported.
Yeah, thank you. I would just add that it's not just financial dollars and cents. It's also the amount of time for staff and elected officials involved in these things that is a distraction from things like the gentleman from Beverly Hills will probably talk about in terms of quality of life.
Of course.
John Mirish.
Thank you. So here's my feedback, and I do hope it's included in everything going forward. I think there needs to be more of a discussion of consistency of RHNA, as we know that HCD used a variety of methods to try and figure out RHNA numbers, none of which had any kind of internal consistency. And so there needs to be data that makes sense, not cherry picking, which I think is a problem. And I think most importantly, I think our community, I know for sure, and I hope a lot of other communities and believe a lot of other communities would like for RHNA to go back to being a planning tool, which it initially was. It was originally a planning tool to accommodate projected growth, and it's strayed so far from that that I think going back to the original intent would be something very important. I'll be very clear that I don't think HCD itself should have a voice in what RHNA is going to be going forward. That would be a little bit like letting an agency investigate itself. In fact, I believe HCD has been singularly denying the results of the state legislative audit, which suggested that there were many mistakes made during the last RHNA cycle. From what I understand, HCD looks at it as a vindication. It is anything but. And so the fact that they would take something that is so highly critical as the state legislative audit and suggest that this is vindication shows that they should have absolutely no role in discussing what RHNA is going forward. Now, you mentioned that there were some WIMBY groups that were involved. Have there been any homeowners groups or homeowners associations that are also part of the discussion?
So I don't know who was invited, so I just see who attends these meetings.
Okay.
I haven't seen any homeowner or resident association.
So that to me is, of course, a huge and massive failing if you've only got people who are basically representing the financial interests of the real estate industry who are ultimately there and not the people who are actually living in the homes and living in our region. So that to me is another major issue. And then finally, I'd like to criticize in the strongest of possible terms the opaque, secretive, and untransparent nature of the groups. Here you have a group supposedly soliciting public input while excluding the public. I mean, that to me is, that could come from Franz Kafka or something like that. But the fact that they are unwilling to allow the public to listen, participate, and be a part of the overall project, to me, means that the whole process loses legitimacy. I think we could question anything that comes out of there because it's happening in a smoke-filled room. And quite frankly, I'm very proud that our city was the first to ban the sale of tobacco, and I'm not a fan of smoke-filled rooms. So aside from that, I think aside from looking at climate change, which I think is important, but we need to really look at Earth overshoot, the impact on overshoot. July 27th this year is Earth Overshoot Day, meaning we basically used up all the resources, the regenerative resources of the Earth, that the ability that the Earth has and can regenerate within a year already by July 27th. And climate change is a subset of Earth overshoot, as is biodiversity, and there are other issues. Climate change is important, but we shouldn't narrowly focus on it. We have to look at the larger problem, which again is the ability of the planet to regenerate all of the resources we are using and exploiting, including some of what is called, green energy, because many of the minerals that are used are not renewable and that sort of thing. We need to look at that bigger picture. So I recognize that this isn't something that you are deciding, but you are our voice there. And I would request that my points be included in all discussion. And thank you so much for your report.
Thank you, John. Mayan, who from SCAG is attending the sounding board meetings?
I am your local friendly RHNA expert.
So you're the only SCAG person attending these sounding board meetings?
Yes, they've requested only one person from each organization.
Okay, thank you. And I call on Wendy Bucknam.
Thank you so much. Thank you, John, for your comments. I didn't know you were going before me. So having been through this process and also having dealt with the numbers that were not based in any kind of reality that we were allocated from HCD in the state, I think anything that we do going forward has to take into consideration a relook at those original numbers, because now we're compounding on top of those and potentially creating additional burdens, if you will, if we don't really go back and take a look at that original number that was allocated to us. So that being said, the question that I do have is, and you touched on this, Mayan, so thank you for touching on it. The staff report does identify that various councils of government sit on that HCD sounding board. So thanks for touching on a few of them. Who are all the COGs and MPOs that are participating in those sounding board meetings? If you could email that to all of us, unless it's very easy to answer right now, that's fine. And do these other COGs have similar issues and comments regarding RHNA reform as that have been voiced by SCAG, including some things that John had mentioned, and certainly things that those of us that sat on the RHNA subcommittee mentioned during the process and the 50 appeal hearings. So will we be coordinating with other COGs and any kind of mutually agreed upon issues in developing the SCAG comment letter on the RHNA reform? If you could just, and I know that was a couple of questions knitted in there, but that's all of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member Bucknam. So the last meeting, I did note for the COG representation, and again, I don't know who was invited but did not attend, but the ones in attendance were, of course, SCAG, ABAG MTC, there was MCAG, which is Merced County or Association of Governments. And then there was SACOG and SANDAG on the line. So in terms of being able to coordinate with other COGs, because there is some variance in how they approached the RHNA methodology is obviously going to be different from ours. And they do sometimes have different viewpoints just because they were more satisfied with their determination than we were, for instance. So they're less keen on changing the determination process than we would, because we were the only ones, I believe, who appealed our regional determination number. But that is something we can explore as we move along in our RHNA reform, as we review our draft recommendations and the input. We can explore ways, if we can, to coordinate with other COGs.
You know, if I could just follow up, thank you for that. But to John, to just kind of expand on what John said, you know, the minute that a city would say that we're going to have open discussions so that people can speak freely, but we're not going to let the public be involved, you better believe what we will hear back from HCD about doing that. And so this is really disingenuous, and I wholeheartedly agree with John, with what John said, but that is not on you. Thank you for the report, and thank you for the good work that you're doing to try to carry our message forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Mayanne, on the sounding board meetings, it's you told us that the agendas are posted online. Are minutes posted after the meetings?
So I have not seen them yet, because also our members want, the sounding board members also want to view them as well, and they haven't been made available. But we will keep everyone updated if we do see minutes available.
Okay, thank you. So I'll be calling on Don Caskey, and then Frank Zarunian, and John is your, okay. So I'll be calling on Don Caskey and Frank Zarunian. Don Caskey.
Thank you. I'll be short, and thank you for your report. I just want to reinforce what John was observing and what Wendy was observing and pointing out. One of the things that you mentioned was all of this is to build trust and not to poison the process. And I couldn't agree more with what they said. You can't do this in a smoke-filled room, opaque, that nobody else can know what people are saying or pushing or what the philosophies are, and then expect that you're going to end up with trust from the community or a whole lot of communities. So I really think that the sounding board, the way it's all being put together, if it's not, it sounds to me like it's already met maybe, is wrong, just flat out wrong. And it needs to be an open, it needs to be transparent, and it needs to have a real diversity of voices. That's it.
Okay, I'll be calling on Frank Zarunian and then Casey McKeon.
Thank you, Mr.
Frank.
Chair. I'm going to be even more brief because I agree with all of my colleagues, having been around the block on this issue, and I'm going to say it, I have absolutely no trust in HCD. And if they wish to earn our trust, then they need to work harder, because we all know what happened the last time around. Ideology took over reality, and we were just given fantasy. So until such time that we talk about reality and real planning, and I agree with John that, this process was more of a planning tool. And until we get back to normalcy, I don't know how this is going to work, to be honest. And I hope that you're expressing our feelings and the importance of the public input into this process, because I agree with my colleagues, this is going to backfire like an atomic bomb.
Casey McKeon.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. This is Casey McKeon from Huntington Beach. You all know exactly where we stand. And I echo exactly what John said. The fact that these meetings are not open to the public and include resident groups that are severely affected by these RHNA mandates is absurd. And it's frankly outrageous. And so if we're serious about RHNA reform, you would include the public in these resident groups. So I don't want to beat a dead horse, but there can no longer be any opaque meetings, smoke-filled rooms like we discussed. This has to be open to the public if you guys are serious about RHNA reform, and anything less is unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. So Mayan. Mayan and David, please take back these comments you heard today from the CEHD committee members to the sounding board meeting that you will be attending on Monday, correct?
Yes, that's the last scheduled meeting.
Okay. And then as David explained to us for the SCAG RHNA reform timeline, and you have that PowerPoint in your agenda packet, CEHD is instrumental in providing feedback to the SCAG staff so that they can submit the comment letter to HCD in September after we have our special August meeting. So all CEHD committee members, I hope you responded to the email you got about scheduling the special August meeting. I'm sorry, the special the special August meeting of the CEHD committee. Thank you, Mayan, and thank you, David. Chair's report. Welcome new members. I would like to welcome the following members to the awesome CEHD committee. Valerie Amascua of Santa Ana, District 16. Andrew Sorega of La Mirada, District 31, and Celeste Rodriguez of San Fernando, District 67. Welcome. Update on Connect SoCal outreach. SCAG has concluded the in-person and virtual workshops for Connect SoCal that were held throughout the region in April and May 2023. These workshops were an opportunity for stakeholders to participate and share their thoughts on the pressing issues impacting Southern California. Stakeholders can still contribute to Connect SoCal by taking a brief survey before June 4. Those that take the survey will be entered for a chance to win an iPad or one of 10 gift cards. SCAG will present the highlights and findings from the Connect SoCal outreach to the Regional Council next month, and will also ask the Executive Administration Committee and Regional Council to approve an update to the Connect SoCal Policy Development Framework based on feedback received at the May Policy Committee meetings. Update on REAP 2.0 programs. SCAG has released the call for applications for the housing infill on public and private lands pilot program. This is a competitive call for applications with an estimated budget of $8 million available through REAP 2.0. This call provides consultant assistance for projects focused on assessing available infill, public-owned and private-owned lands for affordable and mixed income housing and neighborhood serving uses, and land use regulatory initiatives for increasing residential development capacity in corridor-wide and area-wide infill areas based in justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. The application deadline is Monday, July 10 at 5 p.m. For more information on the HIP program, HIPP program, please visit the SCAG website. In addition, SCAG anticipates releasing the Notice of Funding Availability, Funding for Lasting Affordability in June to fund trust funds, catalyst funds, and innovative financing strategies to support housing production. Staff report. Let's hear from Yvette Macias, Government Affairs Officer. Yvette.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll be incredibly brief so that we can all go get some lunch. A quick update on the SoCal Greenprint Technical Advisory Committee. SCAG is currently in the process of finalizing the TAC, which will advise staff on the development of the Greenprint tool and ensure its alignment with the approved RAM policy framework. The TAC will provide a forum for potential users to provide direct feedback on data selection and policies to ensure SoCal Greenprint is an effective tool for users throughout the region. Staff are currently reviewing applications and working to ensure regional representation, and once finalized, the TAC will begin meeting this summer. SCAG staff will report on recommendations for the Greenprint tool at the Energy and Environment Committee and the Regional Council in the fall of 2023. As we discuss the RHNA reform process, a quick reminder that the public listening sessions will be on June 22nd and June 27th. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This concludes my report.
Thank you, Ms. Macias. Regarding future agenda items, I invite all committee members to email Yvette Macias so that Yvette and SCAG staff and the chair and the vice chair can review and consider future agenda items, but I will call on John Mirish.
Thank you. And I just briefly wanted to suggest that we, as I mentioned before, do a focus on what can we do to expand home ownership? What can we do to bolster the shrinking middle class from both sides? It is under attack from both sides. What can we do to look at home ownership as well as a means for people who in the past have been disadvantaged to join the middle class and to become stakeholders? And the second thing I would like is I'd like for us to invite Professor Michael Storper from UCLA and the Sorbonne, I believe, to discuss the impact of capital on housing. I know I've discussed before, and this could be a subject as well, is the impact of private equity, Wall Street, global capital on prices, especially, and on skewing the markets. I think it would be good to get him as an expert to discuss that, and then hopefully that can lead to a further discussion of recommendations that we can make to counteract that. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Duly noted. Any announcements? I would just like to thank the committee members. This is our first meeting after the General Assembly. It was a wonderful event. Thank you for being on the committee, and we're kicking off the new year of meetings following the General Assembly. I was really glad with this meeting. I was really excited. Thank you for everybody's participation. Adjournment. We look forward to your participation at our next meeting on Thursday, July 6, 2023. This meeting is now adjourned.